Hey everyone, welcome to our new podcast. I'm Kirsten.
And I'm Faith.
And this history podcast is going to be full of quickfire information while still entertaining.
This episode is about Egypt from 1417 to 1650. We will give you all a timeline and an outline of our favorite acronym, SPRITE, which stands for Social, Political, Religious, Intellectual, Technological, and Economic.
Overall, you're going to get a quick, summed-up version of Egypt with the two best podcast hosts, us.
First, we will look at the SPRITE acronym and how it relates to Egypt at this time.
Much like around this school, farming was very popular. Unlike this school, pottery also happened to be popular. In Egypt, most people settled by the Nile so their farms could stay watered. The king was the head of the country, followed by his vizier, similar to Jafar and Aladdin. After them, there was the court, the priests, scribes, regional governors, and generals of the military. All these people were considered important and often had a say in how the government and country were run. Beneath all these people were the artists and craftspeople, and the government overseers. I don't know about these people, but if they're anything like my boss, I would not like them. The lowest of the low people were the farmers, peasants, and slaves.
Politically, a lot was going on. Their government was a theocratic monarchy because the kings ruled by a mandate from the gods. They believed that all laws passed through the gods before they were set in place. During the late 1400s, the Black Death killed about 40% of the people in the country, causing a political shift. The country was weakened and able to be conquered, which the Ottoman Empire succeeded in 1517. After the 15th century, the Ottoman invasion pushed the Egyptian economy into decline. The weakening economy combined with the effects of the plague left Egypt vulnerable to invasions, and the Portuguese took over their trade routes.
The Egyptians believed in many different gods. They thought that each different god controlled something. So if they needed a good harvest, they would pray to one guy. And if they were hoping to get pregnant, they would pray to a different one. They also believed that the gods had given them anything they needed and had set aside the land for them. They thought their gods were obsessed with them because they were the coolest. The main god in their culture was Osiris. He was the god of the underworld. Horus was the god of the sky. Seth was their god of chaos and violence. He was the god of the sun. There were many other gods, but these are just the main ones. Eventually, they moved on from having multiple gods to becoming a Muslim country when they were taken over by the Ottomans.
It's hard to believe that at some point humans had brains that did more than scroll through TikTok. However, in Egypt, they were creating and inventing all sorts of things. Things like mathematics, geometry, surveying, metalworking, astronomy, counting, writing, paper, and many different medicines. So I guess we have them to thank for all the math work we hate.
While learning all sorts of random skills, they were writing in hieroglyphics, which is honestly just some glorified pictures.
Egypt had no physical coin, but they still set the value of items based on it. Trade was conducted through the barter system and based on a monetary unit called debate. I would spend all my debate. Everyone had something to contribute to the economy, and there needed to be skills that were considered non-essential. So Kirsten would fit in perfectly here.
Now we're going to focus in on the political and religious aspects with the timeline.
The long and confusing timeline we are looking at begins in 1417. The Mamluk Sultanate was ruled by a sultan, like in Aladdin, who ruled Egypt. They benefited from the east-west trade in silks and spices. During this time, people got artsy with metalwork, woodwork, and making textiles. They also began to build many public and religious monuments.
From 1400 to 1425, the Mamluk state suffers its greatest periods of threats, both external and internal. They faced devastation caused by famine, plague, and civil strife. The Central Asian conqueror, Timur or Timur-Lane, was a large contributor to this. Similar to Faith, he was called Timur the Lame. He had his sights set on using violence to conquer Egypt. He invaded the capital of Cairo and eventually captured it. Although they were experiencing destruction, people still made time for their happy little hobbies. They built mosques, designed art, and furthered trade.
We then jump to 1468 with the reign of Qaitbay Bey, the greatest of later Mamluk sultans. During his rule, Cairo and Alexandria had commercial buildings, bridges, canals, and religious foundations. Although the Mamluk realm is frequently at war with the Ottomans, similar to me and Kirsten, their architectural patronage continues. Qaitbay Bey's funerary complex in the Northern Cemetery is the most celebrated structure of this period from 1472 to 74.
From 1501 to 1517, the style of art and architecture in the Mamluk state followed the style of Qaitbay. The critical financial situation of the Sultanate is reflected in the construction methods of the period. Some would say Faith's financial situation is also critical. The most important commission at this time was the funerary complex of the Sultan, which included a mosque, mausoleum, convent, madrasa, Quran school, and water dispensary, and is supported by a caravanserai and commercial hotel.
During this time, the Ottoman armies under Selim, or the Grim, conquered Syria and Egypt, bringing an end to the Mamluk Sultanate. Although the Mamluk Sultanate was destroyed, they still had significant amount of influence in the state of Egypt. They continued to be replenished by the purchases from slave markets. Slowly, they turned these slaves into government officers in the Ottoman office, and eventually they could dominate it. Kind of how I dominate this class. Under Ottoman rule, Egypt is no longer the center of an independent state, but is also an important regional center. Initially, the arts and architecture continued the style set by the Mamluks. The Ottomans greatly admire the works of their predecessors and do not immediately impose the style set in Istanbul. However, with time, Imperial Ottoman elements are integrated into local vocabulary. Textiles and carpets are recognized in the international market.
The period of 1520 to 1566 was often regarded as the Golden Age. The reign of Suleiman, popularly known as the Magnificent or the Lawmaker, is defined by the geographical expansion, trade, economic growth, and tremendous culture and artistic activity. During this period, Ottoman officials appointed Cairo, the capital of the Ottoman province of Egypt, commissioned public and pious foundation. Noteworthy are the mosque and madrasa of Suleiman Pasha, as well as the foundation of Khusra Pasha.
In 1571, Sinan Pasha commissioned a mosque on the banks of the Nile that was inspired by an example from Istanbul.
Work began on the Mosque of Safi, wife of Murad III, in 1597. Apart from being one of the few 16th century monuments in Egypt with distinctly Ottoman imperial features, the mosque is also a significant example of the female patronage in an Ottoman provincial center.
Well, that concludes our first episode. We covered everything from their gods, architecture, hobbies, economic changes, and more. We cannot wait to dive back into the next unit. Stay tuned.
Bye!
Bonjour.